Welcome to Strength FM. Chris and myself back in Australia now. First podcast since we've been back. We've got a very special guest on today, Pete Bommarito from Bommarito Performance Systems over in Florida. How you doing, Pete?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. Pleasure to have you. Do you want to start with a rundown of your story and your business as well?
Yeah, no problem. I own Bommarito Performance Systems, which has training facilities in Florida. We've also have affiliates up in Pittsburgh and down in Houston for draft prep, NFL draft prep, that is. And then I'm also the owner of Bommarito University, which, it's kind of like an educational platform. So we have members-only websites. We run workshops, mentorships, certifications, as well as do a lot of online programming consulting with various clubs, academies, teams, athletes, clients, everything like that. So we're big on, I think, developing clients, developing athletes, and educating trainers and coaches.
That's awesome. And then, the level 1 and 2 workshop I came over for, that was one of the most influential courses I've done, especially over in the States as well. So that was awesome.
Appreciate that, man. Thank you.
No worries. Well, let's get started. So I know you're big on the interplay between the medical field with the S&C as well. And I guess a lot of your treatment and practice is driven by the medical sector. I guess, how does that look in your facility?
Yeah, no question. I mean, we have a medical center in each of our facilities, and we believe in all the medical disciplines. The three parent overviews are going to be physical therapy, chiropractic, and massage therapy. But with that, I think it's important to have all the unique specializations. For example, my physical therapists are trained in kinesiotaping, blood flow restriction, manual therapy, neuromuscular therapy. Our chiropractors obviously do the standard adjustments, but also extremity adjustments, soft tissue work, ART, which is active release technique, MAT, which is muscle activation technique. They do all different forms of dry needling, acupuncture, neurofunctional acupuncture. Then you look at our massage therapy department. I mean, they're trained in all of the, I'd say, necessities with regards to massage, sports massage, and therapeutic massage. But in addition to that, they're very high-level MAT therapists, MATRX therapists with different specializations in foot function and things like that. So I think when you combine all of the different medical disciplines and there's a definite overlap with performance, that's the future of the industry. Even things like Pilates and yoga, we consider those medical entities. They're not flexibility training. It's very, very specific form of, not only meditation and mental training, but also trunk and spine function and foot function and things like that. So even our instructors in those entities, follow our medical director's lead and everything. So the unique thing is, I think that, years past, there would always be a contrast and a conflict between performance coaches and medical entities, where it was, you get hurt, you rehab, and then when you're done rehabbing, you train. There's not a lot of overlap, and people used to fight the overlap. We encourage it and think that it's necessary. So all of my therapists have taken my education. They are trained in performance training, because once you do good manual work, you have to stabilize your work and make sure that the force can be absorbed and the work actually has some substance. On the flip side, performance coaches need to be trained in biomechanics. We need to be trained in performance evaluations and biomechanical evaluations, as well as, me and my staff. A lot of my staff are MAT therapists. We're MAT Jumpstart trained. And I think that when we're doing our training, we have to customize it to the athlete or the client at that moment in time. So we need to be able to read the medical reports, and based on what was treated, we have to train accordingly and customize and individualize the programs. So now, and you're even seeing professional organizations and college organizations move into the realm where the overlap has to be there in order to get the most out of your clients.
Awesome. And if you've got a group of athletes that you're training, how do you tailor that session for all the different needs based on the medical reports?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think people sometimes enjoy training in groups for the atmosphere and for the, overall intensity and competition, push each other and things like that. But we always strive and let them know that even if their preference is to train in a group, and sometimes it's usually going to be a small group, we're going to overstaff it, and everybody's going to be on an individualized program. You know, if we're training football players and they're defensive skill players, they have to work on backwards multi-directional movement. The movement mechanics for the sport and the position are similar. However, it's what you do in between the full speed application drills that makes it individualized, because somebody might need more stress and force through the support system at the foot and the ankle, where somebody else might need to have more stress through the trunk and spine. So there's different strength endurance and power endurance complexing exercises we can implement that raises the threshold of force at the necessary body part at that moment in time. And it helps support and complement the actual movement training or weight room training that we're doing. So that's why I think it's important for us to understand and be trained at the basic levels of all the medical entities. So when we get the medical report, we can customize it accordingly. So that's going to be the overlying concept. You have CNS activation drills, you have technical mechanics that is just raising threshold of force. You have application full speed drills, whether it's linear, lateral, forward multi, backward multi, that is going to be specific to the position in the sport. So everything from a full speed application needs to be sport position specific. However, the foundation of the technical drills needs to be specific to that person. And if you understand how to organize it well, really we're doing individualized training. We just happen to be multiple people in the weight room or on the field at the same time with a lot of coaches. You know, I think that's going to be the key, and that's the wave of the future, especially the way this industry is going.
That's awesome. And then, so you touched there before on raising thresholds. Can you talk a bit about your philosophy on the preparation for each training session, especially the training versus a warm-up?
Yeah, I mean, we call it CAMPS.
Yep.
CAMPS stands for CNS activation and muscle joint preparation systems. So we don't look at it as, well, okay, we need to train. We need to warm up in order to train. I think that the warming up is important. Raising tissue temperature is important, but that's not the focal point. The focal point should be looking at the systems of the body and preparing the joints and the muscles that cross those joints for the necessary forces that you're going to see in the training session. So if you just break the body out into three simple systems, you have the support system, which is the joints of the toe, forefoot, rear foot, ankle, up into the knee. You have the suspension system, which is from the knee through the hips up into the pelvis. Then you have the trunk and spine system, which is, you know, the trunk and spine down into the pelvis, up into the neck, and out into the upper extremities. So I think when you look and segment out those systems, you can micro progress the tolerance of force through the link that is the support, or the link that is the suspension, or the link that is the spine. Okay. And that's the way we do it. Now, if you look at different exercises in the support system, you can absorb force, accept body rate, redirect force. There's specific exercises that will target and focus each of those concepts, and you can progress it. That's what we call a system. It's progressive over time. Now, while you're doing that, you're actually moving, and you can do an exercise down and jog recovery. So by default, you are raising tissue temperature. But I think the focal point needs to be on looking at what the athlete has the ability to absorb and redirect force in the systems, and make your preparation specific to that. By default, because they're moving, they raise tissue temperature. I think a lot of times people start calling it a warm-up or an active dynamic warm-up, and they think that as long as the athlete's getting warm, they just kind of choose randomly exercises of, wait, this is an active stretch for the hamstring. Here's an active stretch for the hip rotator. It's so random. It's not progressive. They're just randomly choosing things, and then the athlete feels warm and the athlete's sweating, so let's go. You know, I don't believe in that. I think the term warm-up is badly misused, and it's not even appropriate. That's why we use the acronym CAMPS, because it's more appropriate that from second one, minute one, we are training and we're preparing and we are progressing that preparation over the course of the training cycle. You know, so I think when you start looking at that, you look at the difference between support and suspension. A lot of times the hips will be tight. The hip extensors will be tight. The hip flexors will be tight. The hip rotators will be tight. And many times people think, okay, it's tight. I do an active stretch. It loosens. We're ready. Well, the tightness in the hips could be just a simple fact of a guarding pattern because of an inefficient support system. So if we start with support system prep to raise the threshold of force, by default, those guarding patterns will be released neuromuscularly and the hips will loosen up. Now, if you do dynamic stretches in the suspension system, it actually becomes effective and it will hold throughout the session. So I think from an overall injury prevention standpoint, it's a given. It has to be done. From a performance standpoint, it definitely has to be done, because if you can increase range, great. But if you can increase range you can control and control at high speeds with those excessive forces, now you've made the increased performance. Now that's easy to see and evident with athletes, but I think the unique thing is if you look at the general fitness population, people that want to take boot camp classes and cardio classes and get into a weight room structured routine, they had the same inefficiencies that athletes have. We look at every client from an athletic standpoint. You know, their sport might be walking up and down stairs without pain. Their sport might be, I want to play recreational basketball and not be in pain. Their sport might be, I'm just never trained before. I'm overweight, need to lose weight, and I want some structure, but I want to stop being in pain. Everything goes back to being in pain, coming out of pain. And I think a lot of times the pain that sets in, whether it's plantar fasciitis and knee tendonitis and low back pain, are a simple fact that they're weak in ranges. They can't control ranges. And when you apply a force through a boot camp class that they can't control, that excessive force is going to lead to inflammation. So if we can reduce that, it's easier with people because they're not playing sports. We just got to get them ready for everyday activities and workout activities that they enjoy. You know, so I think we have to take the same approach, whether we're a personal trainer, we're running a group fitness class, or we're working with athletes, individual athletes in a group setting. It all has to come down to that client, that moment in time, and how we can raise that threshold of force.
Do you, I guess, because you're working very closely with these medical professionals, do you then structure your camps around what the findings of the medical professionals, or are they through your own assessments? Or do you find that most athletes have very similar inefficiencies, so your camps are quite, let's say, to an extent, templated?
Well, it's a boring answer, but I have to say yes to all three. Okay, yeah. So number one is, of course, that if we get the medical report and they have tight hips, but they're finding asymmetries in the support system, we have to conclude that the tight hips is a guarding pattern. And if they're working on the support system treatment-wise from a neuromuscular standpoint and it loosens up the hips, we have to reinforce and focus on that within camps. So that particular client will be at a lower level of support system prep, and we'll just do more repetitions to continue to stabilize that force that the therapists raise the threshold of, okay? In contrast, they might have a lot of asymmetries in the trunk and spine, lateral flexion or trunk and spine rotation. So if they're treating spinal rotators, then we read that medical report, we will do strength endurance exercises as a warm-up in our camps that focuses on isometric trunk rotation, which is where we're starting to use the single arm sled march series or the Kiro core sled march series, where you're putting an isometrical force through the trunk and spine while you're actively going through hip extension. You know, so people look at it like, well, it's a strengthening exercise, but it's a strengthening exercise that's appropriate for raising that isometric force. And now they're more prepared for activity. So some of these exercises don't really look like a typical warm-up. They look like strengthening exercises, but honestly, that's what some of these clients and athletes need. So we're definitely read the medical report. We also look at the season. If it is an athlete, they have an off season, which may be long, may be short. So early in the off season, we're focusing more on absorbing force, where later on we're focusing more on redirection of force. You know, and then at the same time, your other question was, are we seeing similar patterns? Of course. I mean, if we're looking at a contact sport like football, of course we expect to see a lot of deficiencies in the trunk and spine if they're a lineman, or the support system prep if they're a running back. You look at tennis, we're always looking at asymmetries because the nature of the sport, because it's a one-sided sport. They serve from one half of their body. It's not like 50% right, 50% left. They're either right-handed or left-handed, you know. Volleyball players, same thing. Baseball players, baseball pitchers especially. We expect to see some asymmetries, but the asymmetries can't be so significant that it misaligns. Swimmers work on a lot of scapular work and then on humeral work. With tennis players, work on a lot of pelvic work just because they're in those deep lunging positions, constantly decelerating and reaccelerating. So the needs analysis for the actual sport and position will be taken into effect as well. So definitely have to look at all three of those factors and train accordingly.
And then Pete, you touched on the MAT before. I don't think we actually have the MAT or the MAT courses here at the moment. I remember you saying they were fairly influential in like changing your philosophy and methods. Would you be able to give us a rundown on what sort of changes or how the MATs influence what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's called muscle activation techniques. And the good thing is they have a jump start level, which is really more appropriate for performance coaches and trainers. And then they have an MAT certification, which is more specific to people that actually treat pain, have a medical license to manipulate tissue. Then they have really advanced MATRX, and they have different specializations of foot function and things like that. And it's great. So obviously my manual therapists that are certified medical professionals that are licensed to treat pain are going to be doing the higher level stuff. But the performance coaches at least have to be Jumpstart trained, because Jumpstart is all about isometric contractions, looking at range of motion, symmetry left to right, and implementing accordingly. So once I started learning about MAT Jumpstart, it's not like I take every client and do a full Jumpstart evaluation for every session. If I have time, I'll definitely do some of those things, but just some of the concepts of isometric contraction and end range, treating weakness primary to tightness, things like that is how we actually develop the entire systematic process of camps, whether it be support system prep, trunk and spine prep. We got a lot of those philosophies from MAT. And it's not uncommon for me to be in the weight room and check things really quick. You know, if you're doing a max effort loaded press or a squat, you have 3 or 4 minutes rest period. I like to be productive when they're resting. Let the CNS recover. But at the same time, if I read an MAT report and they treated hip internal rotation a certain plane, I'm going to check that in between sets to see if that threshold started going down and that inhibition started coming back just from the stress of working out itself. So now that I'm trained to check those things, do some basic isometric contractions and bring it back and try to limit that inhibition, now they're more effective from set to set. That's a really, really common thing for us to do with regards to our weight room training. So we train people individually by, okay, you have to do your press, you have to do your posterior chain, but what are you doing during the rest periods that makes it specific to your body? And you have to be able to read those medical reports and test and treat quickly. So that's why I think I've kind of influenced all my performance coaches to get certified in those things, because it makes for a very, very effective weight room session.
Right. And then I remember Kika, the amazing physical therapist you have over there, she was showing me some of the MAT techniques and assessments. And then, so she tested my hamstrings and hip flexor activation. And then she passively stretched my hamstrings for like 30 seconds and then retested both. And then my hip flexors had no go. There was like no activation there at all.
Yeah, and Kika Mela and her husband Roberto run Mela Therapeutics. They are our massage therapy and neuromuscular therapy directors. They run a great system. They're both certified in MAT at very high levels. Kika's MATRX. And a lot of things that she was doing with you is those stress tests that's specific to MATRX. And yeah, I mean, she's very, very good at identifying symmetry, you know, asymmetries left to right, and treating accordingly to what she sees. Not necessarily where you feel tight or where you feel pain or what your position is, what your sport is. It's what is your body aligned at this moment in time. She's very, very good at identifying those inhibitions and activating the inhibitions, but she's also trained in performance. So she does a great job of stabilizing that work and making sure that the threshold can handle stresses of different patterns. That's what's so unique about that overlap. You know, we encourage and in some ways mandate our therapists to be trained in performance, because they have to be able to know that, because it just makes their treatment a lot more effective.
That's right. And then at the moment, Pete, so you train a wide variety of athletes, and then within sessions as well, you could have a mix of like baseball, NFL, different sports. What sort of modifications, because I know you break athletes into like, overhead and combat athletes. What sort of modifications do you make for each of those?
I mean, obviously, when it comes to overhead athletes, we're talking about baseball, softball, football quarterbacks, swimmers, to an extent, maybe soccer, basketball, tennis, those types of sports. We call it the 5-star program. There's 5 entities that you have to take care of with regards to the overhead motion, whether it be throwing a baseball, spiking a volleyball, serving in tennis, and things like that. The 5 points are RNT, which is reactive neuromuscular training. I mean, in simple terms, you're talking about plyometric training for the trunk and for the shoulders. Just like plyometric training for the lower body, you're limiting ground contact time to raise that threshold of stored elastic energy for stretch reflex to make the support system better, to make you faster. I think people understand and equate plyometrics well with sprint mechanics, but those same stretch reflexes happen when you throw, when you spike. So that's a trainable effect. So we have different forms of RNT or plyometrics for the trunk, for the hips, for the energy transfer, and for different forms of the shoulder complex. Another one is going to be pure power. So you have power of the elbow extensors, power of the trunk rotators. Then you have strength endurance and power endurance, which is just a base of strength of scapular motions, but an endurance complex over time. Power endurance is obviously they have to be powerful, but they have to elicit a certain level of power with an endurance over time, which is very specific to a sport like tennis. And then you have balance and deceleration. I think that overall, when you equate balance and stability and deceleration for those types of sports, because it's a one-sided sport, a baseball pitcher that's right-handed is only going to throw all his pitches from his right hand. You're going to expect to see some asymmetries, but at the same time, it's our same exact repetitive motion over and over. So a lot of times, the best form of your beginning off-season GPP phase training is training the decelerators, reversing the motion. So we have a whole perturbation and eccentric loading and definite like reversal strength type of training when you come to the deceleration mechanics. So those 5 points need to be trained, progress, just like any other system over time. That's why I call it the 5.5-star system of overhead athletes. And then we just slightly modify it because there's different motions of throwing a football versus throwing a baseball. And then with combat, you're looking at, all your fighters, obviously, your grapplers, wrestlers, MMA fighters. You have to really start to get specialized with, hand speed, hand-eye coordination, leverage, bending with leverage and hand speed, grip endurance, and things like that to just make it more specific. And again, just like anything else, those are trainable effects over time. So if you just look at how important grip strength is for linemen in football, for hockey players, and especially for grapplers and wrestlers and MMA fighters, grip strength is important, but grip endurance is important. And you can progress it over time just like anything else. So just like anything, we obviously have to do our movement mechanics. We have to do our weight room work, but you have to work in those specializations with combat and overhead athletes.
Right. And if people want to see some of these exercises and programming systems, they can find that on the Bommarito University?
Yeah, we try to be as accessible as we can. Obviously, my passion is education. I mean, I'm a professor in biomechanics over at Nova Southeastern University. I've been an adjunct also at FAU, so I've always had a passion for education. So we started a members-only website. It's at least to give people some basic scientific foundation of a good exercise database, some really detailed scientific coaching videos, sample plans, sample periodization resources, it's very, very popular with trainers, strength coaches, and even sport coaches. There's lots of middle school and high school sport coaches that just can't afford to have the benefit of a strength coach. So by default, they have to warm their team up. So it's good to teach them the basics and give them some at least foundations of what support system prep would be like for any middle school athlete. Now, it's not going to be highly individualized, but we know that growing athletes, the first thing to go is the support system in the trunk and spine. So if we teach them the basics of just how to absorb redirect force and support in the trunk, now at least they can start to make their warm-ups more specific to an actual prep. So the members only website is good. It's very popular, and, we're extremely proud of it. We love to have, get access to the community that's been so great to us. In addition to that, we have more specializations like the level 1 workshop, the level 2 week-long mentorship. We have a level 1 workshop online. We're starting to run certification classes now in December. So I think, in addition to that, we have our online programming. Online programming, sometimes we just get a client that wants some structure, has to train on their own, but lives in a different country and can't come to Florida. So obviously it's not as good as if we train them in person, but at least it provides them some solid foundation structure. But it's not uncommon for people to get online programming that is an academy. We have academies down in Venezuela and the Dominican Republic. We're expanding to India. We're expanding to New Zealand. We have a whole app training system set up for Division I college baseball programs where the strength coaches actually purchase the app. We set the program of the 5-point overhead system, basic movement mechanics, warm-ups, and pre-pitching and post-pitching routines and stuff like that. So, we try to provide a little bit for everybody with our education online.
Awesome. And then we don't want to keep you too long. Maybe one more topic that it's important to both Chris and I is the youth development.
Yes.
What are a couple big points? Because I know you're very good with the youth training and those areas you specialized in before. What are a couple of take-home points for youth development?
Yeah, this is such an important topic that I actually just put it on my regular website, and it's free information. We want everybody to understand the most important thing to train with youth. So if you just go to my regular website that's free, go to the youth performance section, you're going to see grade school, middle school, high school, college, and you're going to see overall philosophies of loading. If you just talk about the basics of weight room loading, it has to be specific to their developmental growth cycle. It's extremely important to understand what peak height velocity is. A lot of people call it puberty. That one point in their time where they're going to undergo rapid accelerated growth. The shoe size gets bigger, the bones elongate, the growth plates form, and the hormonal levels are spiked. So definitely your weight room training has to be specific to that. So you see it that when somebody is before in peak height velocity, what's appropriate and what's been scientifically proven by a lot of great sports scientists throughout the world is reverse periodization models. We can do different types of conjugate systems, and we call it a pyramid ice system for a fully grown high school athlete. But people that are freshmen in high school, that are in middle school, that are going through those growth spurts, you can't axle load. You can't compress spine. You have to set up with isometric structure around the stabilizers. So a lot of our complexes are prime mover and then the opposing isometric. And then you'll do a prime mover and then the opposing isometric. So it's almost like those growing athletes never really have a rest period. The rest period is actively doing an isometric hold through the opposing force of what you just worked. And you progress based on quality contraction, which is tempo, and progress based on volume. You don't progress based off load. It's very, very important to remember that. That's a reverse periodization model. But once you're fully grown, we go the ice pyramid model, where you're going in tension, and then you're going cellular, which is C. That's going to be a lot of higher volumes and slower tempos. And then in week 3, you come back down and do extreme neural loading patterns, because you can do axle loading at that level. That's why we call it the pyramid, because it goes from a volume standpoint of moderate to extremely high to extremely low. But when you bring the volume down, the intensity goes up in that 85-90% range. Hence, we call it the ice pyramid system. So that's going to be an overall great contrast of what you're going to do with a grade school kid, get the extreme reverse periodization in the middle school and early high school kid, and then go to the ice pyramid system once you're fully grown. Now, obviously, there's going to be different modifications if you play soccer versus football, volleyball versus baseball. But that base periodization concept needs to be specific to growth patterns. And that's definitely where the industry is going. And the good thing is it's backed by science, and sports scientists have been doing this for years with Olympic training centers. My vision is just to take that brilliant science that they're doing with very, very high level athletes that are identified early for the Olympic sports and bring it to the masses for all sports. That's really the whole concept behind Bommarito Performance, and that's what we believe in.
And are your camps, are they quite similar between your youth development as well as your more senior athletes?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look at like the level one, we put a whole page of camps and put exercises that will exemplify absorbing force, accepting body weight, and redirecting force. So by the time we get to the professional level, I mean, we have some of our pro athletes that will literally run through that whole script on that page in 7 minutes. It's like a neural stimulation for that. Now, in contrast, if you take a middle school kid, them just choosing 2 to 3 exercises of support system prep, absorbing force, and complexing with some basic strength endurance is work for them. So they're just trying to gain the threshold, where the pro athlete is just trying to maintain the threshold over time. So you could just basically think of it as very similar exercises, but as pros can do a lot more volume and a lot faster speeds and a lot more progressive techniques, where the youth just has to be basic. But they're still doing back dorsiflex series. They're still doing back low walk series. They're still doing back butt kick skip series. There's just different levels of force you can put through that system depending on the level.
Cool. Thanks for your time, Pete. It's been an awesome chat. I think Chris usually wraps up with a couple of questions for our guests.
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. First one is there a daily habit that you have that you find that has been crucial for your success or your development as a coach?
Me personally?
Yes.
I say that I'm big on meditation. I've taken a lot of training courses on meditation, and the number one rule is as soon as I wake up in the morning, I don't think about work. I don't do anything work related. I literally just meditate and try to calm myself, jump in a cold pool, swim a couple of laps, just do something for me for at least 5 minutes. That really helps just get my nervous system, my brain ready to tackle the day. And I live far from work. I planned it that way because I need a good drive. I like to meditate when I drive, so the first half of my drive is coming out of daddy mode and into work mode. When I'm in daddy mode, I'm just kind of relaxing and meditating and getting my nervous system ready and going through my techniques. And then once I hit about halfway in my facility, I start mentally planning my day. When I get to the facility, I lay everything out on a plan, my weekly plan, my daily plan, and I modify accordingly. So I just think it's very, very effective organizational techniques that you got to make time for your family. And I do the same thing on the way home. So when I'm driving home, I recap the day in my head. I start planning things I'm going to do. But once I hit that halfway part, I'm transitioning back into daddy mode. And I might be in daddy mode and then go to sleep and go back to work, I'm in my office, in my house. But I think it's a very, very important distinction. And sometimes I get busy and lazy and, oh my God, I'm too busy for this, I'm too busy for this, and I end up having a train wreck day. But every time I actually commit to that system, I'm so much more mentally ready, and my organizational techniques are so much more effective. I just get a lot more done. And the second thing is, practice what you preach. Eat healthy, supplement well, and always find time for training, even if it's a quick 10 minutes. Stay consistent with staying in shape and looking the part and making sure your demonstrations are on point.
That's awesome. That's great advice. Thank you. And is there a book or a text that you highly recommend that it could be about life, it could be about training, or something that is just your go-to? You're like, yeah, read this book.
The Bommarito Performance Level 1 Manual. I mean, it's going to sound a little odd, but, different things have really changed my life, like taking a Tony Robbins seminar. People kind of laugh at me when I say that, but I was blown away. I mean, I originally went there because somebody was speaking on social media, and I wanted to bring my staff and learn a little bit more. And then Tony Robbins came out, and it was amazing, and it was actually like not just some rah-rah motivational stuff. Like there was actually a workbook and exercises. And, I learned so much more about how to meditate, get in tune with myself, and handle adversity, just going through the exercises in the workbook. And every time I get stressed out or overwhelmed, or I kind of feel like there's so much adversity, if I go back to that workbook and go through the exercises, a calm comes over me, and immediately I just snap into an effective organizational mode, and I become so much more effective at solving the problems of the adversity in the first place. So that's my go-to, is just that workbook that I got at a Tony Robbins seminar, if you can believe that.
Awesome.
And it's really, really effective. A lot of people make fun of me and talk about, it's just about bells and whistles and rah, rah, and jumping up and down. It's if you really tackle those types of seminars the right way, go through the workbook and honestly answer the questions and review it, it's very, very effective. And it definitely worked in my book.
And last one is, what's a bit of advice that you would give to your previous self, maybe as starting out in the industry, that you think might have made a different impact to you, and maybe an impact to other coaches who are just starting out?
I mean, I've done well. I've had a good, very, very successful career. Everything's been going great. But if I really had to go back in time, and I hate to use the word regrets because I don't have any regrets. I think everything kind of happens for a reason. But, earlier in my career, I just wish that I would have really understood the power of social media. I was fortunate that I had a great business advisor that taught me the social media rules. Number one is positivity. Number two is don't ever disrespect your competitors, even if they disrespect you. Number three is you have to educate, inspire, and empower. That is the themes of social media. You have to have a purpose. There has to be an overall purpose to everything you do on social media. And I was taught the right way when I first got started, and my social media is great. And I definitely educate, empower, and inspire. And everything I do has a purpose. I just wish that I was started earlier. Again, if I would have started earlier, maybe I would have done it wrong. Maybe it would have been a detriment. Maybe I would have been one of these guys that is constantly indirectly disrespecting my competitors and things like that, and that's just the wrong way to go about it. So like I said, I wish that I would have had that same great business advisor just maybe 10 years earlier. So one thing I say is, social media is seriously the best invention in this lifetime right now, other than the internet, of course. But you just have to use it right. You have to use it smart. And if you follow those rules of having a purpose and staying positive, great things are going to happen. And I really, really, really try to install that in every trainer I meet, of do it and do it right. Learn it and learn it well. Simple as that.
And how can people keep up to date with you and your career and your different workshops and education?
Yeah, I think the members only website is just the best place to go. It's a very, very small minimal cost per month. And one thing is you have 24/7 access to myself and my staff. So we have a private Facebook group. We have a discussion board within the website, and all questions will be answered and all requests will be uploaded. If somebody looks at a resource and said, "Oh, great, what would you do for a average, middle school volleyball team?" Within a couple of days, we'll upload a resource of some good samples. So, and then we've got great discussion boards and comments and overall positive messages going back and forth. So I think that's a way to stay connected. And every time we do a new feature, a new upload, we literally post a link right on the discussion board, post it in the newsletter, and post it in the private Facebook group. So whether they have time or not, they're going to constantly get inundated with brand new stuff. That's a great place to start.
Definitely recommend getting onto it, guys. If you're listening, it's amazing. And Pete, what will it take to get you to Australia? How many people we need signed up for a workshop?
To be honest with you, we love doing them. Our standard is usually 10. Mm-hmm. I'm going to Pittsburgh in December. Like I said, we've done them down in Venezuela. We've done them in Hawaii. We've done them in California. We're slated to go up into India and Canada next year. We're going down to Houston soon. Australia would be great. I've got some family over there. Nothing would make me happier than have a reason to go to Australia. So I say get a minimum of 10 people and the level one is set. Let's book a date and I'm there.
I think 10 people, give us an hour and we'll get
20 would be ideal. That's usually our cap. Let's get a good 10 and promote it. Perfect. I'll be there.
Sounds awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on. We learned a lot, and I think we've still got a lot more questions to ask you. So maybe another stage we'll get together and have a version 2.
Sounds great, man. I had a good time. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks a lot, Pete.